Hello, everyone. Okay, so yeah, we're going to go with Norman first of all. Norman's going to go through his balance presentation. So, Norman, are you good to go? Here we go. Perfect.
Right, thank you, Ali. I hope there's a little bit of humour in it, in this, but certainly some thought-provoking statements that I'll come out with. So there's that old joke that how many ski instructors that need to change a light bulb, and it's just one, and all the rest just all the rest just say that the turns weren't very good. So this is a made-up conversation that starts us off. Two skiers talking. First skier: what did I do with my centre of mass? And the second skier answered, it will be where you had it last. I want you to give that some thought. Before you start moaning, there are some pictures I've got for you. There are so many moving parts of a skier, don't you think? Especially when they are in motion. And these movements are necessary to enable the skier to control speed and direction. All straightforward, isn't it? Some movements are calculated by the skier. They are intentional movements. And there are movements that are reactive. And it is the subconscious of you, the body, that decides what movements to make to stop the skier from falling. So I believe that the key to necessary and effective movement in motion is balance. That little phrase there, if anybody knows John Shedden, he mirrored that in 1972, I think, something like that. Okay, some pictures for you soon. When playing any sport, balance comes and goes in 3 stages. First, balance is a state of equilibrium. Do you know what that means? A state of equilibrium that is when you're stood still. You might be in a chip shop queue or anything. You're just stood there. Nothing's moving, but everything's in its right place. When you are balanced, you are in a stable, secure stance, like the goalkeeper model that some instructors use. You've now moved something. You've moved something out. So you're now balanced. So balancing is it's an acting word. The actual real moments of motion, there are many body parts all harmonizing and matching themselves. They're stabilized and poised, ready to make the next movement or the next set of movements. And these movements are sequential. And these movements might be PET, if you know what I mean by PET, or EPT. There is a sequence of necessary movements, and that will put you in the zone, making beautiful turns at one in the world, with the world, and balancing constant motion. Do you believe that this is So I'm trying to just move me out of the window. Do you believe that this is a real photograph? This was a common part of circus entertainment when I was a lad. The elephant has been trained to do this. Is Nelly balanced? Well, obviously she is, yes. She is, because her centre of mass is more or less stable over the ball, apart from a few wobbles, of course, but it's in balance. So that's balance with what at the end of it? Balanced or balancing? You tell me. I've always been told that your muscles move your skeleton. Consequently, you do not flex your muscles, you flex your joints. Okay, the footballer, Michael Hoyne, moved his body into the optimum shape to achieve his goal. That's a pun, that. This is both natural skill and, very importantly, learned coached skill. A very strong, stable base has been created by the left leg, which enables him to remain balanced or balancing, because he's moving, balancing against a planted foot, and to put the maximum power through or to the football with his right foot. Here, from a rocky movement, he's now down to a no rocky movements. Things have come to an abrupt halt. There are no movements to maintain a rocky motion. There is no motion, it is a dead parrot. Can you tell what it is yet? The centre of mass of the high wire walker is well below him and the rope. The longer the pole he's carrying, the lower the centre of mass is. He can correct any wobbles by just slanting the pole to do the opposite of the wobble, creating a counterbalance movement. It is still a very dangerous and needs lots of nerve and skill. Now we're getting closer to skiing. This skier is coping with controlling both speed and direction on a very steep part of a racecourse. She has lowered her centre of mass, and importantly, she is calculating. She's looking ahead. She's working it out, waiting for the appropriate time and place to make her next movement or movements in order to complete this turn. Similar actions to the skier we've just been talking about, but however, this skier is not balancing as efficiently as the above skier. Her hip angle and lower body position does not allow her to lower her centre of mass. So to compensate, let me go back. Sorry about that. Press the wrong one. To compensate, she, or rather her subconscious, as we mentioned earlier, is looking to maintain some stability by throwing her left arm out and away from her body. She has not made a decision to do that. Her body's done it for her. The right arm is still pulling her towards the next set of movements. Now this guy has got skill at the top of his controlled movement, stability, and obviously mobility. So this skier is in the ideal position when this photograph was taken. A second later, we don't know. A second before, we don't know. He's got flat feet, 50% pressure on each ski, parallel shins almost, closed hip angle, arms in position to maintain excellent balancing, head and eyes, meaning chin up. This is John Briers, by the way, from Kendal. When I was with him, I was shadowing a level 4 and this was his final run. We can see that he's done all the same things as that other guy did. You can see it's a very efficient change of direction, very supple and very refined. So that's all for now. Thank you for listening to my rambles, and I hope you got something from it. I also hope you remember where you left your centre of mass.
Excellent. Thank you, Norman. So Norman, just as a question for you then, do you find that people are aware of where their centre of mass is or not? Sort of going from your first question.
My experience is that no, skiers, learners don't know where their centre of mass is. They probably don't even know where it is. I always use the boomerang as an example. The centre of mass of a boomerang is just outside it, as is on a skier. I think it's just in front of you, so they can then get a point of where their centre of mass is, and I'd say it's more or less level with the hips. So you can say that you're carrying a little football in front of you, and that's your main centre of mass. And as you go up and down, that comes up and down with you.
And I know you do some work with some racers as well as some instructors. Do you, when you talk about the centre of mass, do you find that where you started on the presentation with balanced, and then balancing, do you go through that as a process with them to show them the different forms and to do exercises from those three stages?
Yeah, that's a double-barreled one. Sometimes I do because they understand it. And then there's some that are good racers and they've not yet understanding that kind of vocabulary. So I don't bother using it unless until they get ready to do more understanding of their own. You were going to ask me something else then?
I was just going to say that obviously to cover all those 3 points, you might not necessarily use the words if people don't get that relationship, but would you go through that process of making them aware of something so they know that the difference between the static, the moving, etc.?
Yeah, right from starting on if they're on the tube and they're stood up holding on to the thing, and the train stops as a jerk, you go forward. And I try to tell them that is the momentum. So, and your centre of mass is moving all over. The centre of mass is controlling you. I'd also like to say that football thing that I say, carry that round, that's your centre of mass, is also mainly wants to be over your base, so that they've got a very strong base on which to move either way. Okay.
And if we was to relate this to say intermediate to advanced skiers, why do you think their mass predominantly moves in the wrong direction rather than moving in the right direction?
Yeah, because they weren't taught good enough earlier.
Yeah.
One's a little bit of inhibition, that they're a little bit frightened maybe, so you're going to have to approach it in a long journey, longer journey than maybe a young, fit 12-year-old.
Yeah. I mean, I'd go on both those points there. That the inhibitions and not trying to push themselves too far would be obviously to do with the mind, and the not being taught balanced when they first begin is crucial. If a learner or beginner picks up the habit at the start, they tend to ingrain that habit continuously, and that's where a lot of instructors then try and undo those habits with that mindset possibly not being too positive. That trying to combine those two can be one of the biggest obstacles we have to come across as instructors or as skiers, especially.
Indeed, yeah. And if some young lads or even adults have learned some skills, our task would be to improve on those skills and teach them new ones, and certainly not to dispel the skills that they came with. You know, because I've heard instructors say, "Oh, that's old hat." Well, yeah, it may be for you, but not for them, because that's the way they've been taught, and then you've got to build on that.
Yeah,
it's there in us. It's them that we're training, not us.
Yeah, exactly. It's the adjust for the learner. It's fit our way of teaching into the learner, not try and get the learner to always fit into our way. And there's a balancing act there with what we do as coaches or instructors. So
as a coach, that's a very clever trick to do.
Yeah, it is. Cool, excellent. If anyone's got any other questions for Norman, either open up your mic or place it into the chat, or if anything comes into the chat, then I can come back to Norman on that. But thank you for the time being, Norman, for that. I like that.
Alistair.
Good insight. And again, if anyone's interested, I've got Norman's presentation, and if he's okay with it, if anyone wants the presentation,
of course,
send it out. And likewise for the last few sessions that we've done, if anyone wants any of the presentations, please let us know. I've got the PowerPoints and I can send them across to you. So with the likes of the iCoach and Matt's alignment talk last week, feel free to let me know. But cool. Thank you, Norman. If anything comes in, I'll come back to you and we'll grab you on that. So perfect. And I think we're about to pass over to Mark for his transition take two. Take two.
Yeah, this one was a little bit inspired from just some messages that I had after last week's Zoom call with Adrian. So thank you for a little bit of inspiration there, Adrian. That video that I ended up sending you kind of led to this follow on this week. When I realised I hadn't prepared anything, and Ali asked me to do something. But yeah, it's been something I've been thinking about since that chat. So we're going to try something a little bit different today with regards to how I present this. So please bear with me and forgive me faffing about with trying to draw while we're doing this as well. Okay, so I apologize now if there's kind of faffing and stuff like that. But before we get rolling, just for a little bit of a variation on Norman's joke there, because I heard it a little bit differently, but when you go with the how many ski instructors does it take to screw in a light bulb, it's any more than one to stand there and screw it in, and the rest to stand around and say nice turns. Then there's the snowboarder one, which I'll probably get in trouble for, but how many snowboard instructors does it take to screw in a light bulb? Once again, more than one to stand there and hold the light bulb, the rest to smoke enough weed until the room starts to spin. Anyway, when you spend a lot of years working in British Columbia, Canada, with very strong and legalized marijuana, it's those are the kind of jokes you get. All right, on to business. Sorry.
Quite all right, Mark.
Sorry, yeah, my bad. Okay, so I haven't got an intro screen or anything like that for you this week, but what we're looking at is still revolving around the transition. Right, hopefully you guys can all see that.
All good.
Cool. So once again, we'll kind of focus on the transition to start with, and then we're going to expand it out to the full turn. So there's a few questions that we're gonna answer, or a few things we're going to look at. So first is going to be what does separation look like in the transition, and what does it look like going around the turn. Then we're going to look at what does steering look like in the transition, and what does that look like around the turn as well. I think we'll focus transition and then around the turn, and then we'll kind of discuss how we can play about with some of these movements and things we can do in practice. As always, there's lots of different things, but what I'm going to do is give you one that I'm hoping is a slightly different take on what you've had before, but other things that have been discussed on previous calls and other things you might have heard are all still perfectly valid, in addition to or substitute of. I'm always trying to give you a slightly different take if I can. And then the last one, we're going to have a bit of a food for thought, is as a result of kind of trying to understand steering and separation through the turn, is try to almost answer that age-old question of where should the upper body be facing when we're skiing. And there might be a little bonus bit at the end as well. We'll kind of see how long I take. All right. So once again, I'm going to start off using some of my videos, just because once again, if there are any questions, I can personalize it by knowing what I was trying to achieve at the time and what was going through my head. Now, the only thing I don't know is really how well this stuff is going to play for you as we go in terms of how smoothly. But anyway, let's rewind a little bit. So what we're looking at is, first of all, what does separation look like at the transition? Sometimes the common questions is when should we be squaring square up to the skis? You know, should we be square at the transition? Here are common questions like that. So let's kind of first of all get an idea of what separation looks like at the transition in a few different. Oh, sorry for the sound. But we'll first of all just get an idea of what separation looks like at the transition. Is this the one I want? I think this is the turn I want. Okay, so here we are, round about the ballpark here. So I'm going to draw a few lines on the screen now. So we've got, this is where the skis are pointing. Okay, we then got, if I kind of draw a line from about the center of mass and follow that line from the zip of the jacket, that, as the skis are flat, is what I would call separation in the rotational sense. All right, so right from there, and there's a little bonus one where I'm looking, tends to be somewhere down there. So that if you were then to follow the skis into the next turn, I'm kind of looking towards the apex of the next turn. All right, so that, for the most part, is what separation looks like at the fall line. Okay, and we talk about that, getting the mass to flow down the hill to move efficiently across the skis with words like toppling and things like that. All right, so last week we focused on being low or being tall in the transition, being fore or aft in the transition, or centered. Now we're kind of looking at this from a rotation and rotational balance point of view. So hopefully that makes sense first of all. All right, let's look at this in a few different turns. So now let's look at this in short turns. Look at that, through the magic of television, going backwards. All right, so I'll slow this one down for you, and then we'll just try and pick one to freeze again. Oh, well, no, not slow it down. All right, so let's just get the transition. So here, slightly different angle, but skis pointing here. This time, mass, not quite at the fall line, but pretty darn close to it. Okay, and what you can see is that, what you can see is that this angle right here is much bigger in a short turn than it was in the long term. All right, we might consider that happens through things like there's more of a greater turning effort of the legs is a common thing that we'd use to kind of answer that as to why there's more separation in the short turn. And it also kind of tells us what the movement is that makes it so the upper body is facing more down the hill. But there's a kind of bigger overarching answer to this as to where the upper body should be facing at the end. All right, so a little bit more there, but still separation at the transition. Hopefully you're all still with me. This is the other short turn that we looked at before. Okay, let's just take this through. I think this is the one I want here. Okay, so let's just kind of get the transition here. Now this time, this is that slightly slower, slightly wider short turn from that level 2 course that I included in a video before, although I don't know if that is in this chat or the instructor chat. Anyway, so slightly slower, slightly bigger corridor. And this time, you can see that in a short turn here, the mass is facing more that way. So not as much separation as that previous short turn. And in that previous short turn, the mandate of that one was to make it quote unquote punchy, which I just translated to quicker movements, tighter corridor, really staying in the fall line a lot more. Whereas the intention for this short turn, like I said, was that really rounded turn, controlling the speed, and gradually funneling and narrowing that corridor. So the big changing factor there is speed. And very, very quickly.
I take it as well, Mark, that on those two different short-term videos, the gradient was slightly different as well on the slope.
Yeah, a little bit. Both reasonably steep though, I think, for where they were on the slope. So not a big enough difference that.
So that wouldn't be a main factor. It would be more what you was asked to do.
Yeah, I think the speed is going to be a more of a factor with regards to. Well, just hold your horses. Wait till we get to the answer of where the upper body faces at the end.
No worries.
Basically, this is all the setup information. All right, get your head around this. Let's get a few different looks at it. That's really all we're trying to do here. Is just to get a few different looks at what separation looks like at the transition. So you know what it looks like in a variety of different turn sizes, terrains, and speed. We'll talk about how those factors into the scenes. All right. I think this is the one. Oh no, maybe not. Okay. All right. So there. Same kind of thing. Intermediate Paros, once again, speed a lot lower, but turn size is a bit wider. And here, there again. So still, much less separation than that short turn. Maybe a little bit similar towards that last short turn we looked at and the last big turn. Here's the moral of the story from all of this. Every single one of them contains separation at the transition. All right. And what I'm gonna kind of leave you with out of this, and I'll say it now so that hopefully I'm reminded to say it again later in case I forget, is that I'm going to make the case that separation is always present in skiing. In some way, shape, or form, separation is always there, and what we're doing is managing that. And that there's never a point in the turn where there's no separation. And that might seem a bit confusing, but we'll kind of get to that in the next bit. So hopefully you're with me so far. We all kind of understand what separation looks like in the transition. So let's just kind of get a little bit of a look at what that looks like around the turn. And for this, I'm going to use some clips from a Warren, from one of Warren Jobbitt's recent videos. So Warren Jobbitt, level 4 CSIA, used to be the kind of, I don't know exactly what his title was, but technical director or coordinator of programs for Western Canada for the CSIA. So, was certainly high up the food chain, very good, knows his stuff, great skier, fantastic teacher. So let's kind of try and get a little bit of a look for what separation and, well, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself.
Slow down, Mark, slow down.
Yeah, before we get to the whole turn, okay, I want to focus on the transition. Yeah, let's do this. Okay, so let's kind of shift from what separation looks like at the transition to what steering looks like at the transition. And I'm just going to kind of play this in the background while I talk for a little bit. But for me, I mentioned last week that the idea that bending at the transition, being low through the transition, was a result of steering the skis back underneath and out into the next turn, as opposed to the bending in the transition being the focus through there. Okay, and this is really what I mean by that. Is you watch this. Watch the legs go from being on edge and away from the body there, and then swing underneath the body and out to the other side. It kind of looks like a bit of a pendulum effect is kind of how I tend to think about it. And it's certainly what it feels like to me when you feel the leg swing underneath as the mass falls across and over the skis. All right, watch it through one more time. So legs out through there, and you see them swing underneath. That is very much a steering move. It happens as a result of the side cut of the skis, and also happens as a result of some turning in the femur in the hip socket. Okay, and I'm not, when I say turning of the femur in the hip socket, I'm not talking about a rotational movement to change where the tip of the ski is pointing. It's more of that abduction, adduction, lateral turning of the femur in the hip socket to bring the skis from out to underneath to across. Okay, so that's steering and separation at the transition. All right, now let's get to the rest of the turn. Okay, so play this through once first of all. And we'll get to separation first of all. We'll pick one early on here. All right. Well, let's see if I can find one that's not way off to the side of the screen. There we go. That's probably better. Okay, let's get to drawing again. So here, skis, and I might not get this absolutely perfect, but skis for the most part are coming. Now I've tried to get roughly the fall line here. Okay, and if we take the kind of center of mass, or kind of around in here, where the mass is facing is maybe, I'm going to be kind here, maybe a tiny bit off to the side, but for the purpose of what we're talking about here, it's almost at the fall line. Okay, now let's leave those lines on there, and I'm going to try something here. And we talk about here, skis facing across, and the mass pointing that way. So you can see that the mass here, from here to the fall line, has got to go with the new turn, with the next turn. Okay, and now let's kind of follow this through, and I'm leaving these lines on just to try a little something here, is now we've got it's facing that way. So that gives you a bit of an idea of how much the mass is moving here in a long turn. Okay, and what this will do is this will kind of come to a little bit, I think, when we're talking about where should the mass be facing, it's going to help us get a better an idea of how this looks and how much the mass can actually move and where it should be facing in a rotational sense, and how much can change during the turn, and how much that can change from a short turn to a long turn. All right, so that's separation. Okay, now let's kind of watch it through at speed. We kind of get an idea of what that translates to with regards to what steering looks like through the turn. And remember, this is a carved turn, so potentially a little bit different there from a short turn, but not wildly so. Still lots of similar things going on. So here, let's cycle back up. This is what I want to focus in terms of what a steering element starts to look like during the turn. And let's kind of focus here on the legs. So if you look at the outside leg, that one's quite long. And with regards to foot to hip here, that one not quite as long. Okay. So it's that whole pedaling motion that was part of what John spoke about previously, is that this kind of pedaling motion can be really used to help effectively steer the skis, because throughout the turn, probably one of the biggest angles of separation that we have with regards to rotational separation is at the transition, whereas during the turn here, this is where we start to get more of lateral separation, and that right there in terms of what the hips are doing. Okay, so for me, steering around the turn tends to revolve around what happens. Get one more. What's happening? No, let's undo that. What's kind of happening around that area, around the pelvis, and then with the lower body too, kind of down through there. All right. So with that in mind, let's just kind of play this through and watch the legs through the turn change legs, change lengths, and that's what kind of allows falling inside the turn of the mass to increase edge angle and really steer the skis on this carved turn. All right, let's kind of look at that here on, this is a shorter turn, but same kind of thing. And we'll see this here. A much shorter turn. This is still fairly carved though as well. And we'll get to drawing some lines in a second here. All right. So let's yep. Okay, so let's draw. Well, let's draw this here. Yeah. Okay, so we got skis. Yep. We got skis at the full line. We got mass. Kind of very much there. All right, let's go back up a little bit to this transition. Mass. Still there. Skis are there. Then let's go forwards to the next transition. Okay, whereas now, look at that, oh, undo. Whereas now we can see that if we overlap, in a short turn, that's how much movement the upper body has in a rotational sense here in a short turn. It's just these angles right here. Okay. Whereas in the longer turn, the angles between those lines were much, much bigger. And then let's roll forwards again to this one. And once again, skis at the full line. And there to there. Okay, so that, pretty symmetrical, and those lines kind of give you an idea of some things that are going on with regards to kind of rotation or separation there, first of all. And then as we kind of keep watching, watch the leg length. You see that inside leg bend and pedal through the turn as the outside leg extends. And that's something that's really helping to guide that steering effort of the legs, that pedaling motion. And what I kind of want to talk about, just as we kind of go through this, is regards to how can this be played with in practice. The bit that I want to focus on is the hips. Okay, we often talk about turning the leg, turning the feet, and things like that. And what I want to do is to talk about how the making adjustments at the pelvis can actually facilitate some of those bendings, some of those bends in the leg. All right, and then I'll also kind of sorry if I'm just getting a lot of feedback from someone else's microphone. If everyone should make sure they're muted. Well, I'll also just bring in as well what was mentioned last week with regards to that eversion and inversion of the foot and how that works with the lower leg too. And we'll kind of separate steering into two parts. So right here, if, for example, rather than trying to maybe bend that inside leg, as it kind of is here, what you can actually try and do, and this is something that I found I had a reasonable amount of success with regards to playing with this, directly affected what the inside leg did just by getting the hips into the right place. Okay, and so that's important. I mean, if your hips are already in a pretty good spot through some steering and through some separation in both pivot points there, then this might not work. But once again, I wanted to kind of give you this because I find sometimes telling people to bend that inside leg to get that long outside leg and the shorter inside leg, you can tell people till you're blue in the face and you come up with various ways of doing it, and it doesn't happen. And it's normally because the hips aren't positioned well enough over the skis with regards to rotational and lateral separation. So there's kind of two things you can do here. First thing that you can play about with is during the turn is to try to lift the inside of your pelvis, or the pelvis that's on the part of the pelvis that's on the inside of the turn, up. Okay, and conversely, you could try to drop the outside of the pelvis down. okay? By moving the pelvis, what's going to happen, especially through the end of the turn, is your inside leg is going to be forced to have to bend in order to kind of allow that movement to happen. Okay, you're going to naturally kind of get some falling into the turn happening and a little bit of increase in edge angle as a result. Okay, as opposed to focusing on bending and softening that inside leg, move the hip on the inside of the turn up and out the way. Okay. Now in practice, what you can see is it just looks like the hips stay stable. But in practice, by trying to make that an active move is what's allowing to facilitate that bending of the inside ski. Because what tends to happen is we see that the hips, rather than being there, tend to drop that way instead. Okay, so that's why we might kind of focus on the hips like this. Now, the other way that we can mess about with the hips is rotationally. Okay, and what I mean by that is you can see that Warren's inside arm here stays a little bit ahead of the outside arm with regards to where these two are. And that gets reflected by what's happening at the skis and where the two tips of the skis are there. That's not really a good line. Where the two tips of the skis are there. Okay. And this alignment is mirrored at all parts of the body. So what I play about with sometimes to manage rotational separation and to play about with this throughout the turn is to actively push my inside arm ahead through the end of the turn, especially through, let's clear this, especially through this part right there. Okay. If I was being more proactive about this, I'd probably have that. I don't know why this doesn't seem to have cycled back for you guys.
I was just going to say, Mark, is your video playing? Because our video's still.
It's frozen, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, let me just start that up again. How long have you been listening to me rambling and not had any of the fancy drawings on the screen?
I think I've only just sort of noticed it from about the last minute or so.
Okay, you might have missed a few bits of drawing on the screen, but anyway. All right, what about now? We moving?
Yeah, playing now, yeah.
Okay. Right, rotational separation. So if I was actively playing about with my rotational separation and making adjustments with the upper body from essentially the pelvis, what I'm going to connect is pelvis and up. Okay, and then you've got the two legs. All right, and I can play about with both kind of halves independently. I mean, in theory, I can play about with each quadrant independently, but that's maybe for another time. So I could actively move this inside hand ahead of the outside hand in order to kind of make sure that I maintain that separation, especially through this part of the turn here, this end part of the turn, okay, in order to hold on to that separation through the turn. And that's probably a big one to make sure that, especially as I'm coming through with the pole plant right here, that I keep this hand ahead in order to maintain that separation and to keep my focus coming down this way. All right. So that is kind of how those would be two ways that I play about with steering and separation throughout the turn for what I would call rotational balance and alignment. And what I kind of really mean by alignment is I need a side on. Let me just see if I can find a side on. Okay. Yeah, what I mean by alignment is really that kind of often, words like line of inclination, things like that. But essentially, that outside foot is constantly supporting the mass and in line with, you know, these three joints, as it were, that we kind of looked at the other week, right? So I use a word for alignment to describe being balanced in the middle of the outside ski in a rotational sense. When you get it right, it feels very, very strong. You know, the phrase that I've heard was, you know, a position of strength, which I certainly believe is apt with regards to how it feels. And that's what good rotational balance throughout the turn feels like. So with all that said, let's kind of finish this up with where should the upper body face? Okay. So what I'm going to do here, and this is where my drawing might get pretty challenging, is let's watch this through first of all. So the path on the screen, the lines on the screen is the path that the skis are taking. And what we're going to do in a second here is kind of pinpoint the path that the center of mass is taking. And just to kind of highlight a couple of things there. So if we get into the next one, you're going to kind of see the center of mass kind of travel through these points. Now this is three-dimensional, so it looks a little bit different than if it was drawn as a two-dimensional diagram, but we'll kind of consider that as we go. So as we kind of watch here, center of mass goes through there, and you can see that if I now where this dot is here, okay, if this was two-dimensional, that would be where it crosses the green line, but it's not two-dimensional, it's three-dimensional. So what I'm going to try and do is just kind of match up these joints. This might take me connect up these dots. This is might be where it takes me a couple of tries. Oh. Oh, that's terrible, wasn't it? Once again, pretty awful. I must have played about with this for half an hour yesterday, trying to get this. Okay, that's going to have to do. All right. So you can see that if we kind of take transition here and there, that's that separation that we'd already looked at the transition. And then if we take it here, and if we then look here, that's where it is at the fall line. And all I'm doing, all these lines are with regards to this diagram, is they're tangents to the arc. Okay, so if I draw a tangent to the arc at the transition for the center of mass and the base of support, the skis and the body, and I draw a tangent to the arc of where the center of mass has traveled and where the skis have traveled here at the transition, that is telling us where the upper body should be facing. Okay. Now here's the one answer that that allows you to fit this into any turn size, into any terrain, any speed, and things like that. Is once again, if we kind of use Iazi's principle here of forces, drawing those tangents to the arc, okay, is where the forces are being directed at any given moment, okay, with regards to that tangent of the arc at the center of mass. That's where the forces are essentially going and traveling at that point in time. So where do you want to face? And the answer that I kind of use that is not my own is face the force. Is quite simple. Okay, sounds like a simple concept in the grand scheme of things, but yeah, face the force. But recognizing that the center of mass takes a different path than the skis is really important. The CSI used to have a great diagram in one of their old things that kind of looked, you know, a little something like, oh God. Okay, you know what? I'm not even going to try to draw that. The CSI used to have a diagram that looked something a little bit like, looked a little bit something like this. Yes, forgive my really horrible stick diagram. I did this ages ago while doodling in my geeky sense. But the orange line there is the path of the center of mass, and the blue line is the path of the skis. All right. And so just recognizing that for kind of efficient and performance skiing, that this is the path that these two things take, and that they're different is important. And we kind of look to highlight that right there. I'm not going to be able to draw on this, but right there in the transition where the lines cross, that they are pointing in different directions if you draw that tangent, and where they're actually pointing in the same direction is at the fall line at the apex of the turn, right? Which I think is probably where we have the biggest change in concept with regards to what you guys might have thought at with regards to steering and separation, and where to hold on to it. I think for me, it's maybe not technically accurate, but I think it's accurate to what we feel. The most amount of effort that we should be putting into steering and maintaining separation, it should be hardest at the end of the turn, where your mass wants to go down the hill and your skis are going across the hill. That's where you're essentially fighting that force the most. It's where you're putting the most amount of effort into guiding the skis with regards to the amount of grip and edge angle that they have, and all that kind of stuff. You're facing across gravity. There's a lot more force at that point in time. So the effort to maintain separation and steer the skis is much greater through the second half of the turn from the fall line on than it is through the first half of the turn. But we place a lot of emphasis on starting the turn and creating separation early. What tends to happen is when we teach that very early on, and it's totally valid, and it's something that we need to get people to do, to start a turn by turning their legs, but it just gets people into the habit. We never dial back from that, and people tend to get all of their separation done in the first half of the turn. And what happens as a consequence is they then have to square up to the skis through the second half of the turn in order to stay balanced and transition. So they essentially get their timing of separation and their rotational balance backwards, is really what ends up happening. And here's the picture on your screen right now is bonus content. All right. So I saw someone posted this on that elite skiing group on Facebook, and it was one of the most interesting takes on this. I've just because I've used a picture myself, but I've got a picture like this of Ted Ligety as well in here that I probably should have used, but this was the one that I've got immediate access to here. People often talk about, that you need to be really flexible in order to put the skis on edge and to get like this amount of edge angle and stuff like that. And I'm going to say, if you look at when you put the picture at this angle, as opposed to the angle we'd normally look at it with the snow being level, it kind of almost looks like I'm standing straight upright. Okay, a little bit of a tilt from the upper body, from the pelvis up to the hips, or from the hips up to the upper body. But it almost looks like if you draw a floor underneath me, like I would stay standing up. And that's what essentially my skis have done. They've created a platform. So rather than feeling like you've got to be wicked flexible in your hips and things like that in order to get huge edge angles, sure, you need some, and you need to have mobility there for sure. But what I'd say is to get that close to the snow, here's the final food for thought. You need to get really, really good and comfortable with falling. We increase edge angle and get closer to the snow with a controlled fall, or falling with style. And I don't hear that very often spoken about. And that's something that I think is where the fear comes into people, is we teach them not to fall. And then all of a sudden, when we want them to start getting to high performance and increasing edge angles, they have to fall into the turn in order to do that. So yeah, I'll leave that there. I think I've rambled on for quite a while there. And that probably was a lot more technical than I originally planned. But there you go. I shall finish there, hopefully with lots of lines on the screen having been drawn, minds blown, suitably confused. And as there's no questions in the chat, I'm assuming it is absolutely clear as mud.
Give it time, Mark. I'm sure there'll be some messages coming in, but just your last little comment about the falling. Well, it's been one of those things that's been around for years, that they say skiing is a process of linked falls continuously down the hill. And
yeah, I prefer that one over linked recoveries. Yeah, I kind of, there's a few concepts that go through my head with all of this stuff, but if my mass is constantly wanting to fall down the hill and also wanting to fall into the turn, well, I kind of need to let it. And if you want to get to those kind of out of edge angles, it's about just setting up the right environment to learn to do it and to fall over safely, and to get those movements going safely. I tend to do one turn, and you can do it really slowly and just pretty much sit down onto the snow to do it. Some of you guys that have been around me at Milton Keynes might have kind of seen me playing about with that sometimes and doing that on sessions and stuff. Yeah, it's all about coming up with safe ways to do that. And then the other one, with regards to like the ski steering through the transition, the phrase that I had drilled into me, and I forgot this during the talk, there was steer the skis underneath your body, steer the skis too flat underneath your body. That was drilled into me by the likes of Josh Foster and a guy called Clay. Gosh, I can't remember his last name, but I can only hear that phrase in my voice with a Newfoundland accent now going through my head. But that must have been like a solid season or two of steer the skis to flat, steer the skis underneath your body, steer the skis out from one turn and into the next turn. And it's not something I hear discussed very often. I hear people talking about bending to a flat ski, which is absolutely valid as well. There's two sides to every coin. I'm not saying to not do one and to not focus on one. I'm saying I'm always just throwing another angle at this on you. But I don't very often hear people talking about steering the skis and doing that. Sure, bend that downhill leg to initiate that, to help that, if that works for you. If that doesn't, then we need to start trying to kind of get the legs swinging underneath, that pendulum effect. When I get it right, when I'm really in that zone, I get it right, I can actually visualize as I'm skiing. I have this weird in the back of my head mental image going on as I'm looking ahead of me and skiing down the slope of my legs swinging and moving underneath me. It's a bit weird, but you know, my old boss Josh Foster, he told me that when he was preparing for his level 4 exam, he was doing a lot of visualization stuff too, and he was visualizing so much pivoting that he'd wake up in the middle of the night with his bed sheets wrapped around his feet because he'd been turning his feet in his sleep. Like, I kid you not. I'm not going to say that's for everyone, but you know, it's amazing sometimes the power of the mind can take on.
Just got a question for you quickly, Mark, and that is just related to what you mentioned earlier on, and you said about separation. So are you saying separation is always there, or it should always be there?
Sorry, so separation should feel like it's always there, or should always be there?
Separation should always be there. Okay, that's what you said was it's always there, or should it always be there?
Well, okay, here's my take on that. First one, yes, separation is always there at every single point in a ski turn. As when you say should it always be there,
yeah,
by adding the word should, you've implied that something has or will go wrong. I think anytime you use the word should in a sentence, it means something has or will go wrong, i.e., well, that should have happened. Hope, you know, when I do this should happen. You're expecting something to go wrong if you use the word should. So let's just say it is always there. Let me just very, very quickly give you an idea, because I maybe wasn't super clear on this one during the talk. I can do this very, very quick. All right. Okay, so we've got separation here that we kind of drew as there and then there. So this kind of looks more like rotational separation, right? The skis are facing one way and the mass is facing another way. Fairly simple, and that's when we use the word separation, that's what we often talk about. Then people also sometimes use the phrase lateral separation. I think angulation and lateral separation tend to be somewhat interchangeable by a lot of people, but this, honestly, it's this stuff during a ski turn. It's phrases like separation, lateral separation, rotational separation, angulation, inclination, hip hike, counter rotation, rotation. Do you see the never ending terminology battle we end up in now? There's so many words and different terms people use to describe those lines on the screen that I drew. That's all they're using by using those words. So here, in this part of the turn, where I drew the skis at the fall line, mass at the fall line, well, here the separation is more lateral. Okay, so still separation here, and it's right there in the hips that you can see it. As a result of that inside hip and that inside leg bending, that inside hip being up, that it's right in that hip area there that you can really see that separation. To me, it looks like the outside hip is maybe a touch behind, but it's all in a line from there into there. All of these joints form lines and connections. Okay, and there, those ones tend to be a little bit different. So for me, that's what separation tends to be a little bit more lateral in nature with regards to how it's built and developed and created during the turn. And then as you transition and release, that rotational separation tends to be there. In actuality, they're both present all the time, just in varying degrees. Okay, but yes, separation. And this is literally, while I was going through these videos and planning this talk last night, some of these ideas just pop into my head as I'm talking and going through it. And that's where the idea of, geez, you know what, separation is always there.
Yeah.
It never ever goes away. We just manage it, and we manage it differently. We could have also looked at how angulation is a different movement at different parts of the turn. Those lines that I just drew, angulation is that typical C shape that we often hear and talk about. Sorry, I'm going to share this again. I think
once he starts, we just can't stop him.
Yeah, sorry. But, angulation then more, later on in the turn is a little bit different. Let's kind of go through to there. Whereas here now, if we kind of look from there, like there's no big kind of C shape. Oh, there's no big C shape through there. But what we do get from there, and this is going to move this way. So angulation through the after the fall line almost like turns into the way I've heard it described as like a bow. Just becomes like a forwards bend in the waist, like you're bending towards your skis, towards your feet, and down the hill, and towards your pole plant. And that's a common thing that we kind of do there. So the moves we make throughout a turn as a result of steering and separation and alignment are different at all parts of the turn. And I tend to break the body down into 4 segments. So you've got your inside and your outside leg, and your inside of your upper body and your outside of your upper body. Each quadrant is doing something different throughout the turn. And I think if you separate things into bigger blocks and as bigger components as possible, it makes it easier to manage. It's I believe in the literature it's called degrees of freedom. The more degrees of freedom you have, which is like points of movement, if you're focusing on like ankle, knee, hips, and all these different points of movement, the more complicated you make a movement, the harder it becomes. But if you can separate something into the leg and the upper body, okay, you can make those movements much bigger and connect entire limbs and joints and movement systems together to make it much simpler to work and understand.
Cool. Yeah, I'm in agreement with you. Totally. Right, there are some questions. There are some questions that have come in. So Tom Gilly has some really interesting stuff about falling. Yeah,
you might have to send me some of those, Aidan. Just send me a link to it. I haven't watched all of Tom's stuff, but yeah, anyone that can describe that really well, I'm interested to learn, because I think that that falling inside the turn, that movement, and not necessarily the movements that we do to do it, but it's hard to describe, I think. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah. Peter Norman has put, you can practice falling feeling on a bike. Give it a go.
There's a lot more consequence doing it on a bike, isn't there?
I was just about to say the same thing.
I've got a few great, in fact, I don't know, well, you can't see it's healed up pretty well, but I had a nice big road rash skin there from falling over I fall over quite successfully on my bike quite a lot. I just don't get back up like I do on skis.
I'll let you keep practicing that one, Pete. Enjoy. The idea of steering the skis underneath the body strikes me that it's almost like the skis are tipping you up. That's from Adrian.
Tripping you up.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, tripping.
Yeah, I think when you watch that video, anything that allows you to visualize it and translate that visualization into a feeling or a sensation before you try it will give you a good idea of what you're going to do and what you're going to feel when you approach it. You know, it's interesting. Your feet and your skis are both throughout the turn catching you and supporting you, and then at the transition, tripping you up and releasing you into the next turn.
There is a point when the skis go under the body, and for a nanosecond, the skis are flat. I get my athletes to shout out loud when they can feel it. As from Norman. So just highlighting that point of where the skis become flat and that transition, that crossover is starting to happen.
It's a great way of trying to develop understanding and awareness. I guess you're doing there, Norman, which I think is fantastic. Get them to you don't just want to have the fire truck when they get to the bottom of the hill and you ask them about it. It's like, how did that feel? Did you feel that? Did you notice? And they're like, oh yeah. And it's like, oh, okay, are you a fire truck? Yeah, I'm a fire truck. They say yes and agree to everything.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. I'd be interested to know what other feedback cues you get them to pay attention to with regards to how they feel it. Like, how are they actually noticing that their skis are flat?
Yeah, no, that's a good way. Making self-awareness is so important. Jez has put, working on the concept that tighter turns need more active directional change of the skis. I try to think half a turn ahead and dial in the degree of counter rotation to coil my core spring ready for that turn, and sometimes it works.
Well, sometimes it's part of the process. That's part of the learning and practice. Eventually it'll work more and more, I think. Yeah. What I would say for any of this stuff is try to practice beyond that perfect result and the perfect outcome and the perfect turn. Move it in all parts of the turn in different ways and experiment with it for several runs to see how it feels and to see what happens. Once again, I think it's another Tom Gelly video. He's got a video about hip mobility exercise. It's kind of like skiing. I'll put it in a playlist and share it at some point. But I did this with the racing group, and we stood there. You stand still. Let's see what you can see. All right. Can you see my hips? Oh, fantastic. Look straight at that very awkward part of my body. But so I'm keeping my feet planted and totally flat. I'm not moving them. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn just my pelvis. My upper body is also staying totally straight. Like, if you can see me, this is staying straight the whole time. My feet staying straight the whole time. And I'm just turning my pelvis. Feels very, very weird. But we did this for a while to warm up. Okay. And then what we did is we put that kind of tilt into the pelvis as well. And you can see as I'm standing here and doing this, how it's making turning happening in these legs. Okay. And then we went and tried that during the turners, and we messed about with the pelvis quite a bit. And it's amazing the knock-on effect it has to the lower body. But that's just biomechanics. It's the way things work. Our bodies work in chains. So yeah, go beyond just pinpointing one specific part of the turn to get something perfect or accurate. Mess about with it in all parts of the turn. You'd be surprised. Like, in order to make sure that my mass is aligned through the first half of the turn, right now, I think to go against years of ingrained skiing, I sometimes feel like I rotate into the start of the turn to make sure that I move my body with with the turn and with the skis. In actuality, it's not rotating, but it kind of feels like that sometimes because it's in contrast to what I've done before. So that's where, you know, something feel different, or, you know, not translating it as feeling bad. It just feels different as a result of what you're doing. So
yeah, cool. Norman's put throwing yourself down the slope, Basie circa in 1973. So that'll be part of the criteria back in 1973 from Basie. Just throw yourself down the slope. There we go. Thankfully, times have changed. Susie Marty has asked, Ali, can we do this falling exercise on our ladies group session? Susie, I will get you to message the rest of the ladies, and if they're up for it, we can happily do that on the next group session. Not a problem at all. And I will video the whole process.
I was going to say, get some video of you guys falling over around on the slope and looking silly. It's good stuff.
Excellent, excellent. Right, Mark, if there's any other questions come in, obviously I'll come back to them and bring them to you. So, John. Where's John gone on my screen? There he is. John, are you good to go? Are you?
I think half the chat has managed to leave during my talk. I clearly got.
No, I think there's only been 3 or 4 that have dropped out, but some people just watch for lunch, so don't take it to heart, mate. It's not personal.
Totally taking it personals.
All right, John, are you good? You're on mute at the moment, John.
Yeah.
Right, there we go.
Good start. Okay, so I think some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about today will probably, like we have most weeks, is going to be a bit of a crossover between kind of what Mark said and what Norman said. But I guess that's going to happen. The more that we do these things, the more crossovers we're going to get, because that's just the way skiing is, basically. So let me share this page. Let me see.
I'll just confirm that John actually isn't in prison. It might look like it, but he's actually at work at the moment. So I'll just to let you know.
That is true. It's not one of the prettiest rooms that we have, but it's the quietest one, so that's why I'm here. Also, internet's terrible here, so if we do cut out at any point, just give us a shout, Ali, and I'll kind of, you know, if I'm... Okay, so I want to have a look at function before form, and how do we develop skillful skiing. So I suppose first of all I should kind of clarify what I mean by function and form and things like that. So if we think about form, a direct sort of definition of form is a particular way something exists or appears. So in skiing, what we see in front of us, what somebody looks like when they're skiing. And then function, a definition of function, quality of being suited to serve a purpose well or practically. So what I'm thinking about is, do we look like, does a skier look like a certain way because of what they're doing or because of what they're trying to look like? I guess that's what I'm saying. So let me move on, and then how we're going to develop skills to kind of help that. So 2 pictures here. Who's the most skillful skier, or who looks the most skillful? If we were to kind of...
John, we've not got any pictures up on the screen.
Is that not sharing?
No.
What have you got on?
Just your lovely face.
Oh, just me talking. Okay, let me try again. Maybe I didn't press. Let me go back. Maybe I didn't share. Let me start again. Bear with us, Ali, 2 seconds.
No worries.
Shrink that. Oh, I don't seem to be able to bring up the shared screen on Zoom. It's not allowing us.
Yeah, the multiple share is still on.
Yeah, I know, but for some reason, I don't look like I'm actually in the Zoom meeting properly anymore. I don't have, you know, the actual like main screen of the Zoom.
Yeah.
I've lost it. It's gone. When I go on, it just says, it gives me leader in 2020 gone at Magic Quadrant meeting solutions and stuff like that. It's not giving me the actual. Well, looking at it like this, I'm not actually even in the meeting properly. It's kind of...
You're definitely there.
You can definitely see me.
Yeah.
We might have to do this without pictures. It wasn't the best, as per every week, it's not the best PowerPoint in the world anyway. So
Can you do it without the pictures?
yeah, we can try, because it's definitely not working. I can look at the pictures and talk through as we go, and then maybe that'll work.
Yeah, you can do that, and then we can come back to any questions.
Is there any chance you could quickly email it to Ali, and then he can just play the presentation while you talk?
Quite possibly.
Just make sure I'm not still sharing or anything like that. No. Just want to make sure I'm not blocking you from sharing.
Yeah. It's never done that before. I can't even like join into the chat or join into the...
Can you not do anything though?
No, I can't do anything.
If you try emailing it to me quickly.
Yeah, I'll try the best.
Oh, shadow banned on Zoom there, John. You get your barred from all the features.
Right.
Just while we're sorting this out, just out of interest, how do people find the video with lots of lines being drawn all over it today for a bit more of an interactive take? Now some thumbs up from David. Liked it?
Yeah, there's a few thumbs up there, mate.
Does it help alleviate some of my boring rambling and listening to my voice?
We love your voice.
Yeah. Well, actually, I'm not sure if I should take the laughing as a yes or a no as an answer to that one.
You put yourself down every week, and it's only you that puts yourself down. No one else does. So
a bit of self-deprecating humour.
Going back to what I said to Hussein, be a bit more positive.
Well, there you go. See, John, no comment mark. Okay, all right, John.
Yes.
You want to play that game, do you? Okay.
Nice one, John. But John, you've known him for too many years, so you've got an advantage.
It's fine.
And I'm sure some of the others just being too polite.
We always like a bit of banter. I'm well aware of how much I drone on. I mean, so when I've made videos out of these presentations afterwards, I whittle down a 20-30-minute talk into 10 minutes each time. It kind of lets me know how much more waffling I've been doing while we're on here. So,
but that's all part of it, though, mate. We need that because it's what's going on.
Well, when you make a video, you can just you only need to say something once in one way, and people can rewind the video
if they choose to.
If they choose to, which I doubt they do. Looking at the YouTube stats, if they make it past 30 seconds, you're doing well.
How's John getting on?
Not well. It's not even letting us share it. Like it can't even. I think it must. I don't know if it's my computer. I think it might be my computer.
Well, let's keep the general chat going. So I mean, we're
Would it be easier to leave and rejoin?
Quite possibly.
Yeah. If you just try doing that, John, we'll just have a little talk amongst ourselves for a minute or two, and then when you come back on, let's see if it does it.
Yeah.
See, John suggesting the ultimate technology fix. Turn it off and back on.
There you go.
Is that it?
Oh, here we go. Look at that. See?
Stuff. Is that it? Can you see?
Yeah, we can see it, mate.
Yes. So turns out I hadn't pressed share screen, but never mind.
It's always the simple things.
So we'll start again. Anyway, can everybody hear? Is that all right? And you can see.
All good.
Oh, good. Let's go this like that. Okay, this should work. Okay, so yeah, just a quick recap. So function before form. I want to look at, do skiers look a certain way because of what they're doing, or are they doing something because of how they look? And then also how we can kind of develop people's skillfulness during skiing. So I've got these two images here. Who is the most skillful? I would imagine, for those that are slightly less uneducated in skiing, should we say, that you may assume that the skier on the right of the picture was more skillful than the skier on the left of the picture. I know lots of you there will know exactly who both skiers are. It doesn't really matter who the skiers are. But I would say that, or I would argue that both skiers are equally as skillful as each other. And I would also argue that I don't think it would matter in what era. So if you took skier from the right and put them into the era of skier from the left, they would both perform or look very similar. And vice versa, if you took the skier from the right and put them to the left, I think they would look very similar in the way that they're performing. The way that they look is because of what they're doing. They don't look in a certain way because they're trying to look in a certain way, if that kind of makes sense. So then if we think about what skillful skiing, what skillful skiing is, it underpins a lot of what Snow Sports England's sort of coaching theory is. And it also runs obviously through a lot of the books and publications that John Shedden did. I know that Norman mentioned John Shedden earlier in his presentation. So how do we define what actual skillful skiing is? So in the 60s, there was a lady called Barbara Knapp, and she was a sports psychologist and I believe an ex-tennis player who wrote some books and did some studies on kind of high performance sports, things like that. And what she defined skill in sport as is the learned ability to bring about predetermined results with maximum certainty, often with the minimum outlay of time, energy, or both. So if we think about that in sort of skiing terms, it's the movements that we learn and how we use those movements, or how we predict we will use those movements to get to an outcome in a performance, and how we do that with the least amount of sort of effort possible. So breaking that down, learned ability. This is the skill is something you learn. You're not born with it. You improve it with practice. So if we think about how kind of we learn to walk and things like that, you know, as we're born, we don't know how to walk, but through trial and error, we develop skills and movement patterns and the abilities to be able to move and walk. Predetermined results. You have an aim you set out to achieve. So knowing what you want to do, being able to pick and choose the movements to be able to perform a specific task that you have set yourself. So that task could be something as simple as being able to make 10 turns down a hill in control. It could be skiing down a mogul field, a steep mogul field. It could be skiing through trees, but predetermined, you know, setting yourself an aim, a goal. Maximum certainty. You are very likely to be successful. A skillful athlete can perform successfully time after time. So to be able to classify something as being skillful, it's not being able to do it once. It's not being able to say, okay, I'm going to ski down that mogul field, but one time and then you fall over the 10 other times you do it. It's being able to repeat performances, being able to kind of constantly be able to set the task and be able to achieve that task. Maximum efficiency. So you perform movements smoothly without wasting any energy or time. So again, being able to kind of master the movement patterns or the skills that you've developed so that you can perform them with as little effort as possible, so that we are efficient, so that we're using as little energy as possible. Obviously, because what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to perform over long periods of time. We don't want to just be able to do one performance and then not be able to do that again. And just to clarify, when I say performance, I'm meaning kind of the act of skiing, moving around the mountain, things like that. Just go back a second. So if we think about, again, going back to how I was talking about function and form, I'm just going to, let me just talk over this bit. If we think about function and form, a lot of what sometimes gets taught or what we assume is, or what I would class as techniques. So, you know, very, very set movement patterns as opposed to kind of developing a skill or a kind of a way of making adjustments. So we've all seen sort of exercises and things like that, where we might think about how do we, this is maybe a little crossover with what Mark was saying earlier as well. So we've seen the kind of the demonstrations where keep your shoulders facing down the hill. So we see the exercises where you might hold the poles, or you might cross hands on the chest, where we're thinking about kind of keeping that fixed position of shoulders down the hill. But that necessarily, that's more of a technique. That's something that it's a very sort of one-dimensional sort of thing. What we can do is we can think about the reason why we maybe that is being taught. So if we think about it more in terms of, can we, how much can we steer our legs? How do we steer our legs? It's more about the rotational, being able to build up rotational control, or ranges of rotational movements, as opposed to how much we can minimize something. It's the effect of us being able to steer our legs more efficiently allows us to steer them against the body, as opposed to having to kind of keep the body still and, keep that in a very fixed sort of position. Again, kind of a slight sort of crossover to what Mark was saying when he was talking about the C shape, when we're kind of talking about angulation and skiing, that we see sometimes where, again, a technique is taught where it's leaning out over the outside ski, trying to kind of allow instead of maybe thinking about how do we develop amount of leg lean into the turn, how do we stand, how do we develop balancing skills against the outside ski, how do we get support, build the platform on the outside ski to allow us to move the skis inside the body. So then what happens is we create this position, but we're not fixed on making that shape, if that makes sense. Again, going back, skiers who are skillful and who have high levels of say performance, they look a certain way because of what they are doing. They're not trying to look like something, or they're not trying to do something. If we go back to this picture here, I would imagine, Marcel Hirscher here is not trying to put his hand down on the floor. That's not a technique he's learned. It's there because of a consequence of the fact that he has so much angulation during the turn. So he's developed skills of being able to edge his skis to a sort of a large degree, along with the fact that the equipment's allowing him to do that, which has resulted in the fact that he has a large amount of angulation, but he also has the hand on the inside of the snow as another point of contact for his base of support. If we go to the opposite picture, can you see these pictures, by the way, Ali? Is that all right? Can you? Yeah. If we go to the opposite picture, we can see that this is Ingemar Stenmark here. He has lifted his inside ski. Now, I don't think he's lifted that inside ski because he's trying, that's a technique he's learned as such. I think he's trying to create as much pressure and support on the outside ski as possible at this part of the turn. So subsequently, the inside ski has come off the ground because of how much he's trying to kind of focus the pressure, or his focus of attention, shall we say, is on that outside ski. We'll just keep these pictures on, I think, actually. Again, if we think about how we, again, another thing that we see getting taught, the technique of, keeping constant pressure with the shin on the front of the boot, or keeping hips over feet, things like that. Again, a little bit one-dimensional, when we could be working on how do we balance against the length of the ski, and where do we balance against the ski at certain points of the turn? How do we develop the skills to be able to move and adjust and choose the correct movements for the terrain that we're in, to enable us to be able to kind of stay as controllable, in control as possible. So a way that we can kind of help these skills develop is if we move into slightly more task-based sort of, if we're coaches, how do we coach people in a slightly more task-based sort of way? Or if we're learners, how do we kind of set ourselves little challenges to be able to kind of, these task-based challenges? So it could, if we start off by setting certain tasks, for example, if we take it onto a dry ski slope, which is where I kind of work most of the time, can we make turns within a 3 mat radius? Yeah. And then to develop the skills, can we increase the amount of turns we make inside of those 3 mats? Can we speed up our motion down the hill, but still stay within those 3 mats? Can we slow down our motion within those 3 mats so that we start to develop and these skillful movements as opposed to technique-based movements? Can we, at that point, then can we also predict where we are going to be at certain points of the turn? Can we, can we allow our bodies to be able to choose the correct? Can we naturally allow the body to kind of develop shapes as opposed to us kind of creating shapes, which again, like I said, becomes a little bit sort of one-dimensional. You see, so again, when we talk about skiers from different sort of eras and things like that in the pictures, like I said, I don't believe that there were any more or less skillful. I do believe that in those pictures, it's equipment that is probably restricting or allowing certain things to happen. And if we look at these 3 pictures here, so again, three skiers from completely different eras. So at the bottom here, we have Jean-Claude Gilly, and then on my right, we have Stenmark again, and then on the left, we have Marcel Hirscher. I would say that these 3 skiers are performing very, very similar sort of turns. So the form that they're showing is very, very similar at this point in the turn. So nothing really has changed. So when the equipment and when the conditions and when the environment allows them, the physics are still the same. The same forces are still acting upon the skiers. So you end up with very, very similar sort of images. They're not trying to create these shapes. These shapes have developed because of the skillfulness that they have, shall we say. So yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to say today, really. And then obviously if anybody wants to kind of chat about it or talk about it, then we can. If that's all right.
Yeah, that's cool, John. I think a lot of the instructor-based associations these days are more skill-based and look at more the input rather than the outcome. Whereas I think in maybe in the 90s, it was more about the look and how you should be perceived to look as you're skiing down rather than the input. But that has changed dramatically.
Yeah. I think you're right, Ali, but I think sometimes as well, what kind of as a kind of a follow-on from that, because instructor training was, shall we say, historically very much sort of, demonstrate, can you demonstrate this movement? Can you demonstrate this technique? Can you demonstrate it? It tends to lead into kind of how teaching happens down the line, if that makes sense. So you're right, lots of things have moved more towards the skill-based or task-based, shall we say. Can you perform within variable terrain? Can you perform, certain turns in certain situations, as opposed to kind of what you look like while you're performing those things? And I think that's kind of the point I'm trying to make. Are we doing things because of how they look? Are we trying to recreate something? Because if I ski down, I'm going to look different to what you look when you ski. We might be performing at a very similar sort of level. The performance may be the same, but we may not look the same. Our form could be different, but we're still performing the same as efficiently as each other, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think the picture where you showed the 3 skiers, Jean-Claude Killy, Marcel Hirscher, and I think was it Stenmark. Those 3 skiers there. If you look at what they were being taught or what skills they had, that produced that outcome. And it wasn't that they all looked at a similar picture and said, that's what we want to look like. It was because the skills, the inputs to those turns created that picture, and hence getting a similar look on the outcome, because the skills would be very similar. Apart from the equipment, obviously, the input to the skills was very similar to create those pictures.
Yeah.
Well, it's also worthwhile noting that just different body types and sizes and stuff like that can drastically change the picture. that's being shown, even though they're using the same movements. It's you know, like if you are training, it's sometimes why it's worth seeking out someone of a similar stature to yourself to maybe get a more representative image in front of you to learn from. Like there's you know, if you take two guys off the Canadian interski team, or the last interski team, I think both worked out in Whistler for a while. I worked with Luke at Big White. There's a guy called Luke Neron and a guy called Russ Wood. Russ Wood is similar size to me, a bit taller than me, bit bigger. But he moved. Huh?
5'2".
1 3/4. But he you know, when I ski with him, I can relate to his movements and his timing. When I watch Luke ski and when I ski with Luke, cannot relate to it at all. That like I'm not saying there's not things I can take from him with what he's doing, what he's seeing, but I know that I'm never gonna look like him. So there's no point in doing that as such.
Yeah, and I think sometimes because of the way instruction or coaching is given, and where we sometimes will show clients or we will show people what something should look like, that people do obviously focus on what the look is rather than the input. And I think that's when it comes down to, we need to focus on what is happening in the mind, the feeling, and the different thoughts that are going through the process to achieve that, rather than just the picture.
I got a question for John, or you know, kind of wanted to get your take on something a little bit. Because once again, yeah, there's lots of time between stuff that you bring up there and things we've discussed previously with like learning versus performance and things like that. And obviously part of what was in there with regards to, you know, defining performance, defining skill. You know, I'm kind of thinking of it. This literally just popped into my head, and I'm just kind of get your thoughts on it. You know, how can people, and essentially the question that came into my head first of all, and I'll kind of give you my thoughts on it first, but it's kind of like, how should people know whether they should be out developing and extending and improving a skill versus practicing the skills they have to be able to you know, to get that performance more consistent and improved. And to me, it kind of, when you take that sentence of defining skill with like minimal effort,
Yep.
well, you know, when you take the lower skilled athlete versus the higher skilled athlete, the amount of effort required by the lower skilled athlete to perform anything that the higher skilled athlete can do is obviously considerably greater from that skill point of view. So I kind of thought that the point at which it's time to go away and start expanding on your skill sets, on your current skill ranges, is at the moment where the amount of effort required for you to achieve something is greater than you actually have.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think you also have to start from, you have to be quite honest with yourself as well, I think. So your starting point, you have to be honest at the point of where you are. You know, we sometimes, and that can be either way. Sometimes we kind of overestimate our abilities, and sometimes we underestimate our abilities. And I guess that's where a good coach comes along, you know, who can help guide that as well. If you are getting coaching, or if you are, like you say, peers, you know, working with the peers in terms of, you know, getting honest opinions and honest sort of feedback to allow you to know exactly where you are. And I think you also need a clear sort of a clear destination of what, you know, or a clear sort of, or an achievable aim, and, you know, somewhere that you can kind of move along the journey to in a reasonable amount of time, but it's also, you know, it is achievable, you know.
Yeah, that word of like achievable outcomes, measurable outcomes, it for me, it comes under the umbrella of making people aware of what they're doing and what's happening while they're skiing, as well as making them coachable. Like it's hard for someone to be properly coachable and to affect change if they're not aware of what's going on, if they're not paying attention to certain measurable outcomes. So Norman mentioned that thing earlier with regards to getting students to yell out in transition when they felt the skis go flat. Well, you know, let's open this up to you, John and Norman. What maybe ways do you have of trying to help your students become more aware of what's going on? What maybe instances or examples might you have, or things? I mean, maybe I'm throwing this one a little bit too far out of left field to answer now off the cuff, but just thought I'd get your take on it.
Well, I think some things that that I've used in the past and things like that. If you take it, let's take sort of students who are maybe at the lower end of the skill level, shall we say. And, we can talk about how much control they have by the changes of sounds and the changes of sensations under the feet in terms of how much grip or how little grip they're getting by how sounds change. So skidded turns are obviously louder than what sort of carved turns are. The amount of sort of support they get from the outside ski changes because there's more edge or less edge and things like that. So by giving maybe clear sort of indicators of what they are looking for, or what they're kind of aiming to achieve, then sometimes, or you can then sort of develop people's awareness of what's happening. Kind of.
Can I come in here, John?
Of course, jump in, Norman.
There's two signs about the danger in setting tasks. I'm a lover of tasks. Everything you give a task. So to answer Mark's, how do you get them to be aware? Is I'd set them tasks that I know that they can do, and then we'll soak that up and make it really good, and then I'll give them a task that is a little bit more testing, and it's in that so that's their enthusiasm kept, that their skills are building up, and their confidence and enjoyment is there. So you don't give them something that they can't do. But I've also, on the other side of the fence, I've also seen and heard instructors setting a task that, and I've said, well, that's nice. I like that task. That's really good. What are you doing it for? And they didn't have a clue. They didn't know why they were doing it. Well, I've seen so-and-so do it. It worked for them. So you've got to really make sure that your instructor or coach is really aware of what he or she is doing. Yeah,
it's interesting actually. Like a similar thing happened between me and Ali in skiing. It's actually in the video that Ali's posted. One of the exercises we were doing, it prompted something from one of the Americans to come down, and it brought up all the a negative memory he had of training a bunch of guys that had told him, so what are you guys working on? It's like, transition. Okay, well, why are you doing that? I don't know. How are you going about it? I don't know. Like, and you could hear the just frustration in his voice at these people that he kept getting on his sessions that yeah, like you said, it's like they were doing things because someone had got them to do it because it worked for other people, so they were doing it, or they were just doing it as an arbitrary thing. It's like, right, it's time to work on the transition. It's kind of why I started a little bit of that transition speak last week as well. What happened as a result is, rather than dealing with that situation, like I'm going to guess most of these people are into ski are guys that are in a position to train other trainers, not just train other instructors. And it's like there's a moment there where you have to realize that, okay, we've got a problem that people just aren't aware. They're not aware of why they're doing something. They're not aware of how to do it. And it's all these kind of layers to awareness that I think are important. It's like when I think of you doing that, getting your athletes to yell out when the skis go flat, well, you've probably done a bunch of stuff beforehand in order for them to make the movements, and you've shown them how to make the skis go flat, and you've tried it in various different ways. And then you've kind of translated it, well, this is what it feels when the skis go flat. This is what happens now when you do it in a turn and they glide across the hill, and, blah, blah, blah. And there's a million and one things they can feel. There's different things that the skis will do on the snow. And it's like, all of that is set up for that moment of like, okay, now I'm going to do this final task of checking my understanding and my awareness that it's actually happening in my turn.
Yeah, and that has got to be, like I said, and what you've said, it's got to be practice and everything. Whoops, sorry, I've just got a message. The other thing is a language. You've got to have a vocabulary for the person or the group or whoever's stood in front of you. It's no use talking about technical language to an 8-year-old. Who want to ski, but that can also be to an adult who's a very intelligent adult, but if they just don't know what transition is, and so you've got to tell them, not only show them and explain it, you've got to actually tell them what it is in a language that they can understand.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Like, and I think telling while doing is something that I'm certainly leaning more towards. The Swedes had a pretty good presentation on this as well, but it's you know, sorry, just to personalize this stuff again. You know, when I first started teaching, I used to have that standard beginner introduction where we get the skis, and the first thing I would do at the start of the lesson is I'd introduce the equipment. And I'd stand there with the ski and I'd talk through the tip of the ski, the tail of the ski, the base of the ski, the edges, the binding. And I would, like, looking back on this now, it seems silly. I would finish that conversation. I would finish that talk and say, if you remember half of that, you're doing pretty well. And then it took me a while to realize, why the heck am I even saying this if they're going to forget half of it? And so the Swedish, you know, did their take on experiential learning. And they just said, yeah, we're just going to we'll slap a ski on the foot and we'll go for a little walk through the woods that are around nearby. You know, so they're just walking on flat snow with their skis on, and they learn as they experience it straight away. I mean, that's hardcore experiential learning. It's very guided, obviously, but
sorry to interrupt you, Mark, but this is not a dig at you either, because I don't even know you well enough. Psychologically, I'll tell you that we only remember 7 words out of every 100.
There you go.
There we go. There we go. And I think, following on from all of this, I think it's important for people that are not instructors, or that are people that are under instruction or under a coach, is that they should feel confident to ask the reason to why they're doing something or what they're doing it for. And I think that's something that we as coaches, instructors, as examiners, we should encourage our students to understand and be aware. But if they're not sure, that they should ask the question, well, why am I doing this one-legged skiing, or why am I holding the poles here? And I think that goes hand in hand with all the stuff that you guys have just said, that for the learners, we need to encourage them to ask the questions why.
You know, just to share one more experience, because I found this one really funny, and I'm not saying this is critical, but I found it interesting because I found both the point that they were making interesting at the time and what I thought about it interesting afterwards. But this one lady shared one of her experiences from teaching a lesson, and this is, once again, it was at Inski, but she kind of mentioned, this is while the Argentinian was doing this presentation on perceptions while learning, and how when people perceive something differently or perceive a movement or what you're asking them to do differently, it can affect what they do in turn. And this one woman had shared her story of this beginner that she was teaching, and she just kept sitting down on the tails of her skis, like, so they're doing a straight run with the skis just parallel right at the start, and she kept just sitting down. And it took several attempts, took a while before, you know, the woman spoke to her about it. You know, she was obviously providing feedback, trying to get her to do something else. But she later figured out that this woman or the student was sitting back on the tails of her skis because she thought that was how to stop. She thought that was how she was going to get the tails of the skis to dig in and put the brakes on. And it was interesting how her perception of whatever they'd done so far or how the skis work led to her making that movement to try and make them stop. And it was a very interesting point with regards to how people's perceptions of what you say and what you do and what you show them affects what they do. Then I also thought to myself, hang on, how the heck have I ever let a beginner student get to that point where they have to sit back on the tails of their skis to learn how to stop because they think that's what they got to do? You know, anyway. So there's two sides to that coin, but it was an interesting experience. But yeah,
we've got a little note here from John. I find this more with adaptive, depending on the type, level, and whatever disability. Matching an ideal image isn't useful. We have to concentrate on the function and the outcomes. Yeah. So the picture isn't always going to be the main way of doing it. I guess what you're saying there, John, is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah. I've had the fun of coaching various visually impaired people with the MK Race Club these days, and yeah, you know, demonstrations not worth rubbish to them. Yeah, you know, how something looks and stuff like that, all complete rubbish for sure. So it's yeah, I love adaptive coaching, teaching whenever I get the limited chances to do it. You have to really think on your toes and be creative. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, definitely.
I think if we look at it in a slightly sort of different way as well, I guess all teaching should be adaptive teaching, really. You know, if we're thinking about how we kind of, you know, we're not talking about, everybody is completely different in terms of range of motion, you know, length of limbs, you know, age, flexibility. So everybody, you know, we need to be taking almost an a lot of, I guess, what adaptable sort of coaching comes from sort of regular coaching. I think probably we should take more from the adaptable side and take it into I don't like the word regular, but kind of the actual everyday sort of coaching, I guess, as opposed to kind of
Yeah, it's amazing how something that adaptive has obviously figured out that they have to do, and it's they probably didn't even figure out. It's just well, not necessarily obvious, but when you've got so many different potential obstacles in front of you with regards to teaching someone, depending on all the different things going on there, they've got to learn to adapt. And it's amazing how
I think probably sorry, I was going to say probably because it's very outcome based. It's not about trying to create an image or a style. It's about getting from A to B and getting from A to B as easily and as efficiently, or with as little effort as possible.
Yeah, I guess it's funny how adaptive coaching and teaching is a relatively new thing that started up. I don't know when adaptive coaching and teaching became more prevalent with certifications and stuff like that, John, but in comparison of the world of ski teaching, it's obviously a little bit newer. Yeah. But it's amazing how that's grown up with that direction and that adaptive approach. And then whereas general ski instruction is, like I said, we're still having the function versus form battles and all that stuff conversations. So.
I was going to say one of the interesting common questions I get from people is, I'm not sure I could teach adaptive because I wouldn't know how to adjust for different disabilities. And I'm kind of like, do you vary your lessons for visual learners? Do you vary your lessons based on someone whether they're fit or not fit, or they've done some kind of snow sport before? If you do any kind of adaptation in your lessons, you're already there. It's just we have to deal with something a little bit more extreme sometimes.
Yeah, and it kind of ties into what was said last week after Kaz's presentation. Those technically minded instructors that don't want to teach kids. It's just an adaptation to teach kids. And you should be willing or wanting to make those changes and improvements in your own teaching for everyone that you come into contact with. Once again, I've always got another story. We had this student on one of our GAP programs out in Canada a couple of years ago. So, these training to be an instructor camps. And this guy's name kept coming up in various conversations amongst the trainers. And what was happening is he was being trained by someone one week. And then the next week, if it just so happened, it went from 1 week of training, and then the next week he was on course when this happened. So the first time this happened was before his level 1. He had a week of training and then a week of level 1. And what he did and what he was told and stuff like that, and the week of training on course, he then felt he was told and shown and asked to do different things. So he went to the previous trainer and said, "What were you telling me? I'm being told something completely different this week." So the lack of understanding of, he was told things that week because it was relevant to what they were doing and what he needed then. And then that time. And then, so funnily enough, I had him the week before his level 2. I made a point of making it quite clear with the snow conditions we had this week on why we were doing stuff. He came, I did my very level best to avoid that situation and prepare them for what was to come on the course the next week. That same thing happened. He's been told something totally different this week, so I must have been well out to lunch. And it was just a really, just a very interesting thing. And it's, I forget where I was going with that point. I had that story and I had a point to it. Now I've forgotten what the point was.
Adaptability.
No, it's gone. The point is, if it comes back to me, that's getting old.
No worries. Well, John, you put, obviously we adapt every lesson to the clients, and then you've followed it up with what you said there. Adaptability is the key. Nick's put, I like to set a task with an objective that I don't communicate, then ask about what the student felt. Then we discuss the objective. So it's there's various ways of getting your points across, and it doesn't always have to be explained, doesn't always have to be shown. But then finding out from the student what they know and what they understand and what they are aware of, obviously is important. But going back to John's bit, the adaptability, we need to adapt to everyone that we're teaching. There shouldn't be just a set format of this is what we do and we do it all the time. It should be changing for every client or group of clients that are in front of us constantly. So cool. Perfect. Cool. Thank you, John. I think that's opened up another little discussion there, so much appreciated. That's great. unless anyone's got any other questions for Norman, John or Mark, we will finish up in a moment, as it's 3 o'clock and some people have dropped out. I don't think it's because of Mark talking. I think it's just because we've gone on into the afternoon. So don't worry, Mark. I don't think it's just you. So
on the way out of lockdown, people have got lives again and things to do.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll finish up there now, everyone. And thanks for everyone that's attended again. And hope everyone is doing well and looking.
Oh, hang on, Ali. While it's in my head, I remember the point to my story now.
Go for it quickly, Mark. Come on, quickly. You've got 60 seconds.
While it came back into my head. But the point of the story was, the time that I was leading the group of trainers at that ski school and training these guys, is I posed the challenge to them as how do we get that much better at our job tomorrow that we can teach those students that we find difficult today. Strive to improve and be adaptive and be better than you are tomorrow, whether it's with your skiing or with your teaching. There you go. I remember that.
Look at those words of wisdom. Thank you, Mark.
We could have sat there and moaned about this guy that we were all frustrated with teaching him, or we can go away and say, well, maybe we need to get better.
There we go. We can all continue to get better all the time. So brilliant. Thanks, Mark. Okay, cool. Yeah, everyone's just starting to say goodbye. So yeah, thanks again, everyone. And next week is officially the last of these weekly ones, and we'll look at what we're going to do going into April, and then possibly into May. We might do some evening or weekend sessions. So next week's going to be our last official one, and then we'll just build from there onwards. We are starting to get myself and Julie a lot of inquiries about courses now, and a lot of people are starting to show a lot of interest in some stuff for the summer and for the winter. We're still tentatively putting stuff onto the website and being very cautious with stuff that's happening during the summer, just because obviously there's just so many mixed messages coming out at the moment with regards to, can we get to Europe? Are we allowed to go to Europe? Is there going to be a £5,000 fine? It's not looking too likely that anything will really happen in Europe this summer, and we're starting to plan more for the winter, and we're starting to get courses on from November, December time. So if people are interested in stuff, either contact me and Julie. Have a look on the website, because we are getting close to finishing the updates on the website, so just do have a look there. We are getting lots of inquiries about weekend sessions and group sessions, and I've spoken to Mark and Dan Gillespie, and we're mostly going to put some stuff on over weekends once we're allowed to, from the end of May into June, as well as obviously our normal stuff during the week as well. Some evening sessions I've discussed with Pete at Hemel, if we can put on an instructor-based type instructor session in the evenings, which people can attend. And we're just trying to work out costs with the centre. So obviously the centre gets something, as well as obviously covering the costs of the educators there. And we've got a lot of stuff going on that we are trying to update on the website and get bits of information out. So slowly but surely we're getting there. But if people are interested in the winter courses, we are starting to take bookings now for the winter courses, as in we're penciling people in and we're not taking payment just yet, just so we can see how things go across Europe. And we've got a few things added to, a few new courses and stuff added to the website. And yes, if people have got any questions or anything, just let us know on email, or keep a check on the website, and we will keep you all updated.
Yeah, I've just seen one last question coming in. Did we get anywhere with Carve? The last person we were in contact with was the guy that was becoming a reseller of Carve in this country. I sent him an email, haven't heard anything back. I don't know if you've heard anything more from him, Ali?
No, I've not heard anything back from him at all yet.
Okay, well, I think what we'll do is we'll get up and going again. We'll get skiing again, and then we'll contact him once we know where we're at with regards to how the domes are operating and how things are going, and we'll follow up with him a little bit later on. So watch this space.
Perfect. All right.
Ali,
yes.
are you looking to do, if we can't go to Europe this winter, are you looking to run some courses in Scotland?
If we can't get to Europe, then yeah, Scotland will be our first port of call. If we're allowed to get in up there and do stuff, then that will be a definite. We're aiming for Europe. That's our first aim, but we're just going to see how the opening up, the stepping process of, we've got April, then we go into the May, then it goes into June. If all goes well and we can get to Europe, cool. but we will keep an eye on it. If we can't, then Scotland will definitely be an option.
Thanks for today.
Thanks, Ali. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. Take care, and we will see you all soon. Bye for now.
Bye for
Thanks,
now.
Ali. Bye.
Yeah.